The silence was absolute. Lieutenant Commander Alexis Cade floated in darkness, restrained by 6-point harness in a coffin barely larger than her body. The drop pod's interior temperature held at exactly 17 degrees Celsius, cold enough to keep the electronics from overheating during the descent, warm enough to prevent her from shivering when adrenaline inevitably flooded her system. She could hear nothing except the whisper of her own breathing inside the neuro helmet, the faint hiss of recycled air, and the steady thrum of her pulse in her ears. Somewhere beyond the reinforced ceramic shell encasing her, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance. The Draconis combined dropship Kotetsu hung in high orbit above Vega, a gray pearl against the black. Alexis couldn't see it, couldn't see anything except the dim red glow of standby indicators, and the countdown display projected directly onto her retinas by the neuro helmet's heads-up interface. 4 minutes and 37 seconds until drop. She forced herself to breathe slowly, methodically, the way her instructors at the Sung Jang MechWarrior Academy had drilled into her during the endless hours of drop training. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now. Not when 3 years of preparation had led to this single moment. The Atlas waited below her in its own reinforced cradle, secured in a separate cargo pod that would separate from her command module during atmospheric insertion. 100 tons of death and destruction, the most feared assault battle mech ever created, bearing the infamous Death's Head painted across its skull-like cockpit. Her Atlas. Her responsibility. Her weapon. The mission brief had been delivered 6 hours ago in the Kotetsu's cramped, ready room. Colonel Tomoe Yamada had stood before the assembled MechWarriors with the bearing of a woman who'd spent 40 years perfecting the art of controlled violence. Her voice had carried no inflection, no emotion, just the cold recitation of tactical necessity. Vega's capital city, New Beijing, has been under siege by Lyran Commonwealth forces for 3 weeks. The 4th Sky Rangers have established a fortified position along the northern approach to the spaceport. Their defensive line consists of hardened bunkers, artillery emplacements, and a reinforced lance of medium and heavy battle mechs. Intelligence suggests they're preparing to evacuate critical supplies and personnel off-world within the next 48 hours. We cannot allow this. The holo display had flickered to life, showing terrain maps, troop deployments, defensive positions. Alexis had memorized every detail. The Rangers held high ground, a ridgeline that gave them clear sightlines across 3 kilometers of open terrain. Any conventional assault would be suicide. The Combine had already lost 2 companies trying to break through. That's where the hot drop came in. Bypass the siege lines entirely. Drop directly into the heart of their defensive position from orbit. 1 Atlas, falling like the hammer of God, landing in the exact spot where it could do maximum damage. Shatter their lines from within. Create chaos. Let the ground forces exploit the breach. Simple in concept. Absolutely terrifying in execution. Lieutenant Commander Cade, the colonel had said, and every eye in the room had turned to Alexis. Your Atlas will be the tip of the spear. You drop first. You hold their attention. The rest of the lance will follow at 30-second intervals, but you'll be alone in the hot zone for at least 2 minutes. Can you handle that? Alexis had stood, back straight, and given the only answer possible. Hi, Colonel. I will not fail. Now, floating in darkness, she wondered if confidence had been premature. The countdown reached 3 minutes. Somewhere in the Kotetsu's belly, machinery began to move. She felt, rather than heard, the vibration through the pod's frame, a subtle shift in harmonics that told her the launch bay doors were opening. The void beckoned. She ran through the mental checklist one more time. The Atlas's reactor was already online, running at minimum output to keep its systems warm. The moment her pod landed and released its cargo, she'd have approximately 7 seconds to achieve full startup before enemy sensors locked onto her position. 7 seconds to go from dormant to fully operational. 7 seconds before the shooting started. Her neuro helmet interface flickered, and a new display overlay appeared. Biometric data. Heart rate elevated, but stable. Blood pressure, normal. Stress hormones present, but within acceptable parameters. The suit's medical monitors were satisfied. She wouldn't black out during the descent. Small mercies. 2 minutes. A voice crackled through the communications channel, rendered thin and distant by the layers of encryption and the vast emptiness between the pod and the dropship. Dragon Lead, this is Kotetsu Actual. Launch authorization confirmed. Weather conditions optimal. Enemy air defense systems tracking but not yet locked. You are go for drop. Strength and honor, Commander. Alexis keyed her transmitter. Her voice came out steady, almost calm. Dragon Lead acknowledges. Go for drop. For the dragon. For the dragon. The voice echoed and then went silent. 1 minute. The vibration intensified. The pod's magnetic clamps were releasing, one by one, letting her drift free from the launch rail. She felt weightless, suspended in the moment before gravity reasserted its ancient claim. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity of anticipation. 30 seconds. Her hands gripped the control yokes reflexively, though they were currently disconnected from any system. The Atlas was below her, separate, falling in parallel. She wouldn't actually pilot anything until she reached the ground and climbed into her battle mech's cockpit. For now, she was just cargo, a fragile human shell, waiting to be reunited with her metal body. 10 seconds. The universe held its breath. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The electromagnetic catapult fired. Acceleration slammed into Alexis like a physical blow. 4 gravities. 5, 6. The pod shot from the Kotetsu's launch bay at 300 meters per second, instantly transitioning from the gentle embrace of artificial gravity to the brutal physics of orbital mechanics. Her vision tunneled. Blood rushed away from her brain despite the pressure suit's best efforts to keep her conscious. She tasted copper and bit down hard on her mouthguard, fighting the instinct to scream. Then, as suddenly as it began, the acceleration ceased. The catapult had done its work. She was free-falling now, racing toward Vega at terminal velocity. the planet's gravity well pulling her inexorably downward. The pod began to tumble, a slow rotation that would help dissipate heat during atmospheric entry. Through the narrow viewport above her head, she caught glimpses of stars wheeling past, then the curve of Vega's horizon, then stars again. Her stomach lurched. The neurohelmet's anti-nausea medication kicked in automatically, flooding her system with carefully calibrated chemicals. The urge to vomit faded, replaced by a strange crystalline clarity. She was committed now. No turning back, no rescue possible. She would either land successfully or become a brief streak of light across Vega's sky. Another anonymous casualty in the endless succession of wars that had consumed the inner sphere for 3 centuries. The countdown display had switched modes, altitude readings now, descending rapidly. 90 kilometers, 85, 80. The upper atmosphere began to make itself known, the faintest whisper of resistance against the pod's hull. Not enough to slow her yet, but enough to announce what was coming. 70 kilometers. The first real buffeting hit. The pod shuddered, its ablative heat shield beginning to superheat as air molecules compressed and ionized against its leading edge. The temperature inside the cramped compartment began to rise despite the cooling system's best efforts. 18 degrees, 19, 20, 60 kilometers. The whisper became a roar. Plasma sheeted across the viewport, turning her window to the universe into a wall of incandescent orange. The pod bucked and twisted, following a carefully programmed descent trajectory that would bring her down precisely where Colonel Yamada had specified. Alexis hoped the guidance computer was as good as the technicians claimed. At these velocities, being off by even a few degrees meant landing kilometers from the target zone. The violence intensified. She was being shaken like a rag doll, her body held in place only by the harness straps cutting into her shoulders and chest. Her teeth rattled, her vision blurred. The neurohelmet's inertial dampeners were working overtime, trying to protect her brain from the savage deceleration, but they could only do so much. She felt like she was being torn apart. 50 kilometers. Through the plasma, she caught brief glimpses of Vega's surface, cloud formations, the dark smudge of an ocean, the geometric patterns of agricultural lands. Then the plasma closed in again, blocking everything. The temperature inside the pod had reached 25 degrees and was still climbing. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. She blinked it away, maintaining focus on the displays. Heart rate elevated, blood pressure spiking, stress hormones flooding her system. Her body was screaming at her that something was wrong, that humans weren't meant to survive this kind of abuse. She ignored it. Pain was temporary. Failure was permanent. 40 kilometers. The deceleration increased as atmospheric density thickened. The pod's trajectory was curving now, trading vertical velocity for horizontal, aiming for the designated landing zone. Somewhere below, Lyran radar operators were tracking her descent, shouting warnings, bringing defensive systems online. She was committed to her course. No evasion possible at these speeds. She could only hope the Rangers' anti-aircraft systems weren't fast enough, to acquire lock before she hit the ground. 30 kilometers. The plasma began to dissipate. She could see again. Vega's surface rushed up to meet her with terrifying speed. Details resolving with every passing second. Mountains, rivers, the sprawl of New Beijing, the spaceport, the Liren defensive line running along the ridgeline like a scar across the landscape. 20 kilometers. Targeting lasers reached up from the ground, invisible fingers trying to caress her pod with deadly intent. Her threat display lit up with warnings. Surface-to-air missiles launching. 4, 6, 8. The enemy had committed serious firepower to stopping her descent. The pod's countermeasures deployed automatically. Chaff bloomed in her wake. Clouds of metallic strips designed to confuse radar guidance. Flares burst outward, brilliant points of heat meant to seduce infrared seekers away from her actual position. Electronic warfare systems howled across the spectrum, jamming and spoofing with everything they had. 15 kilometers. Missiles streaked past, decoyed by the countermeasures. One exploded close enough that the shockwave rattled the pod, but the reinforced hull held. Another passed within meters, its proximity fuse failing to trigger. Luck and technology were keeping her alive, but only barely. 10 kilometers. The main parachute deployed with a bone-jarring snap. The pod's descent slowed dramatically, transitioning from barely controlled fall to something approaching a survivable landing velocity. Alexis gasped as the harness straps dug into her chest, forcing air from her lungs. The world steadied. She could think again. 5 kilometers. The terrain below resolved into crystal clarity. She could see individual buildings now, individual vehicles. The Liren defensive position sprawled before her like a military diorama. Bunkers, artillery pieces, battle mechs moving into position, small figures running. They knew she was coming. The pod's guidance system made final corrections, adjusting its descent angle with bursts from maneuvering thrusters. The landing zone approached with terrifying speed. A clear area between two bunker complexes, right in the heart of the enemy position, exactly where she needed to be. Exactly where the enemy would concentrate their fire the moment she landed. 3 kilometers. Her heart hammered. This was it, the moment of truth. She gripped the control yokes again, preparing for impact. The Neuro helmet fed her real-time data. Ground speed, vertical velocity, time to impact. All the numbers that would determine whether she lived or died in the next 30 seconds. 1 kilometer. The secondary chutes deployed, bleeding off more velocity. The pod was falling almost vertically now, guided by the thrusters towards a precise landing point. She could see her shadow racing across the ground below, growing larger with each heartbeat. 500 meters. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from multiple positions. Tracer rounds drew neon lines across her vision. Autocannon shells burst in the air around her, filling the sky with shrapnel. Something struck the pod's hull with a metallic scream, but the armor held. 200 meters. The ground rushed up, She could see individual soldiers now, some running for cover, others manning weapons. A Thunderbolt battle mech was turning to face her, its medium lasers tracking her descent. 100 meters. The pod's retro rockets fired, a final desperate burn to reduce landing velocity to survivable levels. The roar filled the universe. She was pressed down into the seat, crushed by deceleration. 50 meters. Impact. The world exploded. The pod struck Earth with the force of a small meteor. The crash cage around Alexis compressed, absorbing energy, distributing force. She was thrown forward against the harness, then sideways, then back. Her vision went white. Every bone in her body screamed. The neuro helmet's dampeners overloaded, unable to compensate for the sheer violence of the landing. Then, silence. For a moment, Alexis hung suspended in the wreckage of the pod, uncertain if she was alive or dead. Her ears rang. Her body ached. Smoke filled the compartment, acrid and choking. But she was breathing. Her heart was beating. She was alive. The harness release mechanism responded to her fumbling fingers. The straps fell away. She kicked open the pod's emergency hatch, and smoke billowed out into Vega's atmosphere. Beyond, she could hear the sounds of combat. Shouting, weapons fire, the distinctive whine of battle mech actuators. She pulled herself from the wreckage, dropped to the ground, and ran. The Atlas's cargo pod had landed 50 meters away, its shell already split open like a metal flower. Her battle mech stood in the center of the blast crater, its death's head insignia glaring at the sky. 100 tons of weapons and armor waiting for her. She sprinted across broken ground, ignoring the pain in her legs, the protests from bruised ribs. Bullets whined past. Someone was shooting at her, but she didn't look back. She reached the Atlas's foot, slapped her hand against the access panel. The ladder deployed. She climbed, hand over hand, pulling herself up the leg actuator housing, across the torso, up to the cockpit hatch. It opened at her touch. She threw herself inside, sealed the hatch behind her, and fell into the command couch. Her hands flew across the startup sequence, muscle memory taking over. The neuro-helmet interface connected with a satisfying click. Suddenly, she could see through the Atlas's sensors, hear through its audio pickups, feel through its myomar muscles. The reactor surged to full power. Weapon systems came online, targeting computers initialized. The Atlas's computer core welcomed her, with a simple text message projected onto her display. System ready. Awaiting orders. 7 seconds. She'd done it in 7 seconds. Alexis Cade stood up. The Atlas rose from its crouch, a mountain of metal unfolding to its full height. Through the cockpit canopy and the sensor feeds, she could see the Lyran defensive position spread before her. Bunkers to the left and right. Infantry scrambling for cover. The Thunderbolt she'd seen during descent, now turning to face her, weapons charging. She activated her external speakers, letting her voice boom across the battlefield, amplified to godlike volume. I am Lieutenant Commander Alexis Cade, of the Draconis Combine Mustard Soldiery. You are standing in my way. Surrender or die. The Thunderbolt's pilot apparently chose death. Twin medium lasers lanced out, ruby beams that scorched armor across the Atlas's torso. Alexis barely felt it. The damage was superficial, a scratch against her Assault Mech's massive armor profile. She returned fire. The Atlas's right arm came up, and the Defiance killer autocannon roared. 20mm shells tore through the Thunderbolt's centered torso at cyclic rate, punching through armor, shredding internal structure. The Lyran mech staggered, sparks fontaining from ruptured systems. Alexis didn't give it time to recover. She triggered the shoulder-mounted LRM-20 launcher. A swarm of missiles erupted from the launch tubes, filling the air with smoke trails. They impacted across the Thunderbolt's torso and legs, each explosion chewing away more armor, more structure. The enemy mech went down, crashing onto its back, its pilot ejecting a moment before the reactor went critical. The explosion lit up the battlefield. Soldiers dove for cover. The nearest bunker's turret swiveled toward her, a long-barreled autocannon tracking for center mass. Alexis was already moving. Despite its massive size, the Atlas could manage a surprising turn of speed when properly motivated. She pushed the throttle forward, myomer muscles responding instantly. The Assault Mech broke into a run, each footfall shaking the ground, its 90km/h sprint carrying it directly toward the bunker. The autocannon fired. Shells hammered into her torso and left arm, stripping away armor in chunks. Warning indicators flashed yellow on her display. Armor breach in sections 4 and 7, still well within acceptable parameters. She kept running. The bunker's defenders realized too late what she intended. They tried to traverse their weapon, but the Atlas was already too close, moving too fast. Alexis lowered her shoulder and hit the reinforced ferrocrete structure at full speed. 100 tons of battle mech moving at 90km/h carries approximately 1.5 million joules of kinetic energy. The bunker, designed to withstand artillery bombardment and missile strikes, had not been engineered to survive being rammed by an assault mech. The walls crumbled, ferrocrete shattered. The autocannon turret tore free from its moorings and went tumbling across the battlefield. The bunker collapsed in on itself, burying whatever remained of its garrison under tons of rubble. Alexis strode through the wreckage, dust and smoke swirling around her cockpit. Her sensors painted the battlefield in crystalline detail. Infantry positions marked in red. Vehicle emplacements highlighted. 2 more battle mechs moving to engage. An enforcer and a hatchetman, both medium-weight machines that had no business challenging an Atlas in single combat. They tried anyway. Courage or stupidity, she couldn't tell which. The enforcer opened up at long range, its autocannon and large laser both firing. The shells sparked off her armor. The laser left a glowing scar across her left torso. Alexis checked her heat levels, confirmed she had room to maneuver, and triggered everything. The killer autocannon spoke again, its thunder drowning out all other sound. The LRM launcher added its voice to the chorus. Medium lasers mounted in her arms carved ruby lines through smoke, Missiles and shells converged on the Enforcer in a storm of high explosive and kinetic energy. The Lyran mech simply ceased to exist as a functional combat unit. Its right arm separated at the shoulder, blown clean off by autocannon fire. Its torso armor vaporized under the laser assault. Missiles tore through the gaps, finding ammunition stores, finding the engine shielding. The Enforcer exploded from the inside out, a brief sun blooming on the battlefield before collapsing into burning wreckage. The hatchetman's pilot, showing more wisdom than courage, turned and ran. Alexis let it go. Her mission wasn't to chase down fleeing enemies. Her mission was to break the defensive line, to create chaos and panic, to demonstrate the futility of resistance. The hatchetman could spread word of what happened here. Fear was as effective a weapon as missiles. She turned her attention to the artillery emplacements. 6 long tom cannons dug in behind earthworks, their crews frantically trying to depress their barrels enough to target something at point-blank range. Artillery pieces were meant to engage targets at extreme distance, not deal with assault mechs standing in their midst. Alexis walked through the battery like a farmer harvesting grain. Each step brought her to another gun emplacement. Each weapon discharge destroyed another cannon, another crew, another piece of the Lyran defensive capability. She was methodical about it, efficient. The Atlas's weapons cycled with mechanical precision, never wasting a shot, never missing. When the last cannon fell silent, she paused to check her tactical display. The rest of her lance was on the ground now, scattered across the battlefield in their own drop pods. A Orion, a Archer, and a Catapult, all heavy battle mechs, all adding their firepower to the assault. The Lyran line was collapsing, units retreating in disorder. The carefully prepared defensive position disintegrating under the hammer blow of the orbital assault. Colonel Yamada's voice crackled through her headset. Dragon Lead, this is Dragon Actual. Ground forces are advancing through the breach you created. Resistance is minimal. The Rangers are falling back to secondary positions. Well done, Commander. Alexis allowed herself a tight smile. Acknowledged, Dragon Actual. Continuing to engage targets of opportunity, she scanned the battlefield, looking for anything that still posed a threat. In the distance, she could see the Lyran forces retreating toward the spaceport, abandoning their fortifications, their supplies, their wounded. The sight of the Death's Head had done its work. The psychological impact of an Atlas dropping directly into their midst had shattered their cohesion more effectively than any conventional assault. This was what she'd trained for, what the Atlas had been designed for. Not graceful dueling or clever tactics, but the simple application of overwhelming force. The certainty that when an Atlas took the field, someone was going to die, and it probably wasn't going to be the Atlas pilot. She advanced toward the next defensive line, her footfall shaking the earth, her weapons hot and ready. Behind her, Combined forces were flooding through the broken fortifications, exploiting the breach she'd created. Infantry, tanks, more battle mechs. The tide of battle had turned in a matter of minutes. A Lyran crusader appeared from behind a damaged warehouse, its pilot apparently deciding to make a stand. The 65-ton heavy mech raised its arm-mounted LRM launchers, preparing to fire. Alexis didn't even slow down. She triggered her weapons almost casually, the Atlas's firepower erasing the Crusader in a single, devastating salvo. The enemy mech toppled backward, its torso a smoking ruin, its pilot dead before he could even register what had happened. This was the reality of Assault Mech combat. There was no glory in it, no honor, just the brutal mathematics of tonnage and firepower. The Atlas outweighed the Crusader by 35 tons. It mounted heavier weapons. It carried thicker armor. The outcome had never been in doubt. She kept walking. More targets presented themselves. A vedette tank tried to flank her, its autocannon chattering. She stepped on it, literally, the Atlas's 100-ton foot crushing the vehicle into scrap metal. A squad of infantry attempted to swarm her, probably hoping to plant satchel charges on her legs. Her anti-personnel weapons, machine guns mounted in the legs, swept them away like leaves before a storm. Nothing could stop her. Nothing even slowed her down. This was the power fantasy made real. This was what it meant to pilot an Atlas, to be unstoppable, invincible, a walking avatar of destruction that turned battlefields into graveyards. She reached the secondary defensive line and began the methodical process of tearing it apart. Bunkers fell, mechs burned, soldiers fled. The Lyran 4th Sky Rangers, a unit with 3 centuries of proud history, broke and ran before a single Draconis combined assault lance. By the time the sun set over Vega, the battle was over. The Rangers had retreated to the spaceport, boarding their dropships in desperate haste, abandoning everything they couldn't carry. The combined forces controlled the entire northern approach. The siege of New Beijing was broken. Alexis stood in the center of what had been the Lyran command post, her Atlas silhouetted against the burning wreckage of the enemy's defensive line. Smoke rose around her in pillars, carrying the smell of war into the evening sky. Her mech's armor was scarred and pitted, painted with carbon scoring and impact craters. But its structure remained sound. She'd taken damage, certainly, but nothing critical. Nothing that couldn't be repaired. The cost to the enemy had been catastrophic. Dozens of vehicles destroyed. Multiple battle mechs disabled or destroyed. Hundreds of casualties. All because one Atlas had dropped from orbit directly into their midst. Colonel Yamada's voice came through her headset again, carrying a note of satisfaction that almost qualified as emotion. Dragon Lead, return to base. Mission accomplished. The coordinator himself has sent his commendations. You've done the Dragon proud today. Acknowledged, Dragon Actual. Returning to base, Alexis turned the Atlas away from the battlefield, pointing it toward the Combine lines. As she walked, soldiers stopped to watch her pass. Some saluted, others simply stared, awed by the massive machine that had changed the course of the battle. She understood their reaction. She'd felt it herself, once, before she'd become an Atlas pilot. The sight of an assault mech was meant to inspire awe, fear, the certainty that resistance was futile. The hot drop had been everything she'd hoped and feared. The terror of atmospheric entry, the violence of landing, the chaos of immediate combat. But she'd survived, more than survived. She'd accomplished her mission with a precision that would be studied at military academies for years to come. As the Atlas carried her back toward friendly territory, Alexis allowed herself to relax slightly. Her hands were shaking, she realized. Adrenaline crash, post-combat stress, all perfectly normal physiological responses. She'd survived something that should have killed her a dozen times over. The Neuro Helmet's medical systems detected her elevated stress levels and began flooding her bloodstream with calming agents. The shaking subsided. Her heart rate decreased. The universe stopped pressing in quite so hard. She'd done it. She'd survived the iron descent. She'd proven herself worthy of the Death's Head. And somewhere in the darkness above Vega, more drop pods were being prepared. More Atlas pilots were being briefed. More hot drops were being planned. The war ground on, as it always had, as it always would. The succession wars had consumed the inner sphere for 3 centuries, and they showed no signs of ending. But tonight, at least, the Draconis Combine had won a victory. Tonight, the Dragon's claws had closed around another world. Tonight, Alexis Cade had written her name in fire and blood across Vega's sky. Tomorrow, there would be other battles, other drops, other worlds. But tonight, she was alive, and that was enough. The Atlas walked through the gathering darkness, its footfalls steady and sure, carrying its pilot home through the smoke and ruins of war. Behind them, the battlefield burned. Ahead, the lights of New Beijing glittered like scattered stars. Alexis Cade, Lieutenant Commander, Draconis Combine Mustered Soldiery, pilot of the Death's Head Atlas, smiled inside her neuro helmet. She'd faced the iron descent and emerged victorious. She'd do it again tomorrow, if ordered. Because that's what MechWarriors did. They dropped from orbit into hell itself, and they kept fighting until either they won or they died. She had no intention of dying. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not until the dragon's enemies were broken and scattered before her. The Atlas carried her into the night, and the war carried on.